Welcome to the very first episode of Green Talks. In addition to our Green Notes blog, where we give voice to our volunteer group to write articles covering different aspects of sustainability, working together with the editorial team, we now are very proud and excited to have finally launched Green Talks podcast series. We aim to share technology in a format where we will be having guests across disciplines to discuss, again, different aspects of sustainability. I am Malu.
I'm Zeynep.
And we will be your hosts today for this exciting episode.
We have an amazing topic and a project to talk about today. We will be talking about architecture, landscape architecture and urban development. And when we talk about sustainability within these fields, it's mostly about carbon dioxide emission and all the numbers and data. But today we want to adopt a different perspective and talk about the process of design and decision making. And to do that, we will go back to the building boom in Denmark between 1960 and 1975 and explore the practices and learn from them. And of course, we have a great project called Learning from Collaboration, Building Future Practices. Today we have the pleasure of having two amazing guests, co-leaders of this project, professors of history and theory of landscape architecture from the University of Copenhagen, Svava Riesto and Henriette Steiner. Welcome.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having us.
We're very much looking forward to talking about this project today. So, what is this project about? How did it start?
Right. Well, first of all, thank you so much for having us. It's a pleasure to be part of this podcast. And this project is called Learning from Collaboration. And we are architectural historians. We also work on landscapes, cities, about how the built environment came into being. Because when you look around you, you'll see that the world and the buildings, the infrastructures we live in, many of them have existed for a long time. This is an old police station. Now it's an office community. There's a podcast studio. It's a building that was there and that was adapted to new uses. And we know with the pressure on resources, we're pushing the planet to its limits. The way forward in the building sector is not to build a lot of new stuff. It's to work with what is already there, adapt it to new uses. And to do that, we believe that history has a lot to tell us about what is there, why it's where the qualities are in what we have, so that we know how to prioritize, how to make good decisions about what to preserve and where we can adapt and make changes for future uses. And Svava and I, we a couple of years ago, we started another research project where we looked at the contribution of women architects, designers, landscape architects and planners to Danish architecture in the sort of mid-20th century. And that was because we knew that there had been a lot of women professionals in this field, but we just didn't know a lot about what they did, because the sort of what can you say, the typical narratives of what makes great architecture, what is worth telling about our past, about this existing built environment that we live in, that was told through the sort of narrative of the hero architect, the master architect, the creative genius who came up with a new formal language. And often it was only one person who was credited for a building or even a city, the big modernist architects from this period, also international stars like Le Corbusier, Mies van der Rohe. In Denmark we have well-known architects like Arne Jacobsen, Finn Juhl, others. And of course they did a lot of amazing work. But when we read these books and narratives that always talk about the one person, we tend to forget that actually architecture, city making, landscape comes about through collaborations between a lot of different people with different skills, and as we saw in the project on women architecture, also with different backgrounds, genders. And the way we, and here I say we, as Svava and I, as architectural historians, we have together with our colleagues also told those stories meant that we have maybe forgotten, we have overlooked those collaborations. And that also means that there's knowledge about how the world comes into being that we just don't have, and which we think is essential to understand, because what makes particularly Danish architecture from the mid-20th century quite interesting and also different from a lot of other sort of examples from around the world is that we know from other sort of storytelling and also maybe intuitively that those projects have certain qualities because the landscape communicates with the building, with the infrastructure. There's a certain sense of holistic thinking, and which is not just about the building or the landscape or the infrastructure, but it's about how those different professionals work together. And that's a particular heritage, and we sort of know that it's there, but we actually haven't really looked into how it came about. How was those collaborations? And that's what we would like to do in this research project.
That also has a lot of potential to inform today as well. Maybe it's also the nature of architecture. It's like creating something kind of gives this like godly power, and then people just tend to take it personally. But also in today's world, we really need to value the collaboration, because not just one person can do something. If they do, maybe it's just a short-term thing, and then it doesn't just see what will happen in 50 years or something.
Right. That's it. And so this is actually also a question of how we address the holy crisis that we are in at the moment concerning biodiversity, climate, spatial injustices, resource depletion. So we are facing very, very, very complex matters in every building task these days. And with this complexity and the urgent need to rethink how we build cities and how we form the future built environment, we really need to bring a lot of different perspectives together. So this the reason, I think, why we are so interested in collaboration today, and it's not just us, we see that people in the building sector and in other sectors are very concerned with how we can bring different perspectives together. This is, of course, because that's what's needed to deal with the complexity of the questions that we need in the green transition, or the urgent need to rethink practice. And this bringing together different perspectives concerns perspectives from different fields. So today you see people working, across architecture and, more social science and more natural sciences, and people who know something about technology and about water quality. You need a lot of different forms of knowledge when you come together. But also there is a call for having more diverse teams in the sense of what lived experience do people bring to the table, so that it's not just, restricted to one gender identity or one sort of people with one set of bodily abilities or cultural or language background, but working with the city and landscape, which are often public spaces, and at least they're always public concerns. We need to bring different perspectives together, and therefore we are in this project very interested in interdisciplinarity, and we're interested in diversity. And in the Women in Danish Architecture project, we were looking at gender diversity. In this project, we will be looking at how people in the 60s and early 70s worked together, also in terms of different genders, but also different social backgrounds and so on. Because this was a period where the professions expanded enormously. More people came into the engineering education, the landscape education, the planning education. New schools were set up, an architecture school in Aarhus, the first one in Jutland. So all of a sudden you had people working in this field with a lot of different lived experiences, a broader part of the population, perhaps also people from different classes, and at least also from different geographical locations, and many more women than had been before.
So we also wonder how the project process is going. Like, do you already have some findings, or what do you expect to find?
Yeah.
How is it going now?
So we are a research project which is also itself a collaboration between people from different disciplines. We mainly work within history of architecture, landscape, cities, but also organizational studies in the group. We're from the University of Copenhagen, the landscape program, but we also have people in the project from the School of Architectures here in Copenhagen and in Aarhus, from DTU, the Technical University of Denmark, and from Aalborg University, where they also have a long tradition of design and planning. So we work together to also bring in the sort of histories of our disciplines and also our, of course, personal different disciplinary perspectives. And what we're really interested in is we know that what is one of the biggest tasks that's going to face the discipline of architecture and city planning in the coming years. Well, that is not just transforming and the cities we have, but particularly the environments from the mid-20th century. More than half of what was ever built in Denmark has been built in the periods after the Second World War and up through the 1970s, and in particularly the 1960s, where it was this period of building boom. And it was a period where there was a lot of optimism about building a new world, a new modern world, welfare society in this period. It was also a period where there wasn't a great concern about the use of resources, so a lot of this building stock, of which there is a lot, has been built with materials that are maybe not that easy to sort of change to more energy efficient forms of buildings. And currently, quite often the decision taken is to simply demolish a building from this period and build a new one. And for us, that's not just a problem because the waste of resources that this brings along, but also because we see a particular heritage from this period. Of course, it's sort of almost omnipresent, so you can say, oh, it's not a heritage in the sense that, oh, we only have a few examples from this period. We actually have a lot. But what we also know, as I was saying, we just don't know a lot about how it came about, is that this period's architecture actually had a form of holistic thinking often present, that there was collaboration, that there was an idea that these buildings, these areas could only come about if people work together across disciplines. And we think that's a really interesting basis to work from, because now that we not only have to think about the function of the buildings or the built environments, the landscapes, but also about how they respond and help us make up for some of the problems we have in terms of the climate crisis, the lack of resource depletion and other problems facing us, and which are very much also caused by the building sector. Actually understanding that these buildings that are sometimes criticized for being sort of ugly, it's like concrete or it's quite sort of boring, is some of the reactions that are sometimes caused when we see these environments. But actually that there was considerations made in terms of how should people live in these environments in a way that where there was a communication with the outside environment, with the landscape, where there was a consideration about how to get there, how to get away, how to be safe, even though it would often require, for example, fossil fuel modes of transportation. But the fact that there was this sort of more holistic form of thinking, there was a quite deeply rooted understanding that to bring anything about, we had to think across disciplinary divides, we think is actually something quite valuable. And that also means that if we tell those stories, if we research them and understand what they actually meant, we can learn a lot about how to maybe make different decisions about this period's built environment, not just demolish them, but actually work with the qualities that are there. And in our minds, that's also a form of sustainability, because it opens the door for maybe preserving and reusing built environments that are otherwise destined for for demolition.
Yeah, when I look at the time period you study, I also immediately thought, okay, I keep seeing this fact that most of the demolished buildings are from that era, like post-war period. And then I was thinking, okay, collaboration in urban development and architecture, how does that stand when we think also about, okay, everything almost maybe is being demolished back in those times, or like the things that are from those times. And then is it possible to see like the physical impact of the collaboration, so it actually kind of survives today because of that reason? Can we talk about such a thing?
Yes, that's a very interesting question. And the thing is that it had a lot to do with how we today value or assess or look at the legacy from the building boom of the 60s and early 70s. Because if you look at, for instance, the established heritage preservation system, there is a rather strong tradition for, discovering qualities in brick buildings from the 50s. They are sort of in a scale that is very different from the large scale that came about in the 60s. The materials have another tactility. So it seems that we as society have been for a long time more used to seeing values in older buildings than in the 60s and 70s. But this is, of course, something that you can see when you look at established policies and so on, where the 60s and 70s legacy is now entering the debate. But yes, there is a lot of demolition going on, or just neglect of maintenance and so on. And this is very closely tied to a sort of historical understanding that has been quite dominating of this architecture as sort of failed architecture, as a historical failure that we need to fix with new ideas. And we are also building another understanding in the face of that very dominating narrative. Because until now, you could say that in the public there's been sort of an interest in very few selected iconic buildings from the 60s by some famous architects. And we are interested in how we look at sort of more the everyday environment from that period. And if you ask, people who have grown up, let's say in a housing area from the 60s, or so many people in Denmark have gone to a school or used a public swimming facility from that period, or we use the biking lanes from that period, the parks. So I think it's also a question of awareness and changing perspective in how historians write about this period, and to become more aware of the everyday, because people in Denmark, most people in Denmark touch or use legacies from the 60s and 70s in the cities on an everyday basis, and know some of the values that are there. So we are here with this project contributing to build a more nuanced understanding also in architectural history, so that we don't only concentrate on the icons or use a very binary understanding of something as failed or as a success. We're interested in nuances and how this came into being. And we think that by asking questions about collaboration, we will be able to discover other aspects of this built environment that is valuable for discussions about what to maintain and how to care for this legacy today.
And to be a bit bold, maybe we could say that we actually want to write a new form of architectural history, because one that is more relevant also for today. Because it's if we just look at architectural form and sort of value what is important to write about, because it's an innovative or new form of architecture. It's a little bit more like how sort of art history has also been written traditionally. Then there was this style, and then there was a new one, and highlighting the people who were sort of first introducing a new form of art, or a new form of architectural style, and this we don't consider so relevant in terms of what architectural history is for and why it's important, and certainly also important for practitioners today, and that's really our starting point, and other people can of course have others, but we really want to make a change in the way we understand architectural history that appreciates and that is more nuanced, as Svava said, but also more just and accurate in terms of actually doing the job of explaining how architecture, how the built environment comes into being, and that's, of course, individuals and creative individuals play important roles in creating great and functional and beautiful environments and buildings, etc. But maybe we don't really understand how that comes about without understanding the context. And an important part of that context really is the collaborations between individuals, between organizations, between groups, and more importantly, understanding that those collaborations happen among people who are very different, who bring in different skills, not just sort of the big groups, sort of the architects, the engineers, the landscape architects, the planners, but also we need to know something about acoustics, about light to do a building. There are social concerns if you have to create a new kindergarten. How do you listen to and understand what that kind of place should be so that it's good for children, but also for the people who work there and the caretakers. And those are the questions. They are not just relevant to understand through the contribution of one person, but through the contribution of several people who collaborate.
I guess when we talk about collaboration, it also brings the knowledge sharing aspect as well. Yes, we learn from the process, but working with people also helps people to learn from each other. And then how does that impact the future practices maybe also can be discussed?
Yeah, and as historians, this is a quite interesting task to go about, because we are used to also the way that our archives are structured is that we are looking at, certain heroic figures and their contributions and the famous buildings, and we hear about sort of a handful of famous modernist architects again and again, and of course they have contributed, there's no doubt, but to go and look for how was knowledge shared between different people in teams, how did they find common ground, where were conflicts, how did synergies occur, in what context and through what sorts of collaboration and processes. These are questions we will be asking, and we've actually been doing, for instance, workshops with students where we've been looking at the magazines, the magazines of architecture from the 60s, of landscape architecture, of engineering, of garden art. And it's been quite interesting to see that there are very, very few pictures of people who were actually working together. There are some show-off pictures, more like, of singular persons or the results of these collaborations. But we will have to research differently. In some magazines, there are also very few picture of people. The engineers and architects seem to depict people more than, for instance, the garden architects and landscape architects. But we will be applying a lot of different research methods to find these collaborations. We're already beginning to do interviews with people who are still alive, who were active in the 60s. So this project really needs to be done now, because these people are very willing to share and they can tell us. And we're also entering the archives a bit differently, looking at documents and sometimes what is written in the margin and going to different archives to find out. And to us, this is really, we spoke about relevance previously, and this is really also some sort of a knowledge we think is important for future practice, because our students, where we teach today at the University of Copenhagen's landscape education, but also when we go and teach at different architecture schools in Denmark and internationally, many people of a young generation are looking for ways in which to practice differently beyond the idea of, let's say, the star architects or the hero architect that has been celebrated very much in the public around the millennium and also previously. So, for instance, when we were working on some of this material, one of our students, and I think that was a huge inspiration for me, one of our students said, "Wow, these stories are so empowering, because I don't want to become this sort of hero, and I can never become a hero, and that's also not what I want. That's not how I want to practice. So it's so empowering to hear that people have been practicing in different forms of collaboration before." And this is something that motivates us in the project, and why we also enjoy having dialogue with people in practice and with younger generations about this material.
Are there any initiatives or future plans that benefit from the research and already and actually adapt then into current practice? And how do you envision the potential outcomes of the research to help developing practice today?
So in this project, we are in dialogue with practitioners and company, but of course also because we are university teachers, we are in constant dialogue with the practitioners of the future, and part of why we wanted to start this project was also that we felt that there was important knowledge that we didn't have, and actually no one had, and that our students were really asking for. So that has also been an important driver for this research project.
I also wonder if it's like how common it is to actually observe this in today's practice, like the collaboration. Like how do you evaluate today's practice?
So we think, but we don't have sort of hard facts on this. But our understanding is that in some areas of the building sectors, actually they're sort of bigger silos today, or a less collaborative environment than there was in the 1960s. For example, that if you build in a new area, there's a master plan, then the architects come in and make the building, and then the landscape architect comes in and makes the sort of basically just what can you say, fills in the green stuff where there is a gap. This is of course a little bit of a caricature, but one of the projects we looked at from the 1960s that really started this line of inquiry is Kileskovshallen, which is a swimming pool just north of Copenhagen. And there we could see that the building, which is actually sort of celebrated really as a sort of aesthetic icon, and of course is often ascribed to the architects. And now I say architects in plural because there were two. It was a couple, Karen and Ebbe Clemmensen. From the very beginning, they worked together with the landscape architect Agnete Musfeldt and also with the engineer on the project, Knud Bergholt. And they really made a building where the building in its aesthetic design reflects the trees on the area through sort of reflective surfaces, but also through a very, for this period, new and innovative structural system where there are these columns in the building that almost look like trees. And what we found out was not just that, the architects came in and said, we want to make a building with some trees. Please make sure that we get the columns that look like trees and that there's, trees around the building. Actually, this was an idea that happened that was only realized in the way it was through dialogue and through several years of collaboration, because the landscape architect had to work with the site and work with the trees on the site for several years to actually make possible that the trees that were there were preserved, and also to have a decades-long maintenance plan in place by the time the building was finished, so that this dialogue between trees and building could continue into the future. And the same with the engineer who we actually found evidence had really reflected on the difficulties, but also the potential of this collaboration, had spent incredible energy, and also in his collaboration with the builders who welded this new and innovative iron structure. And if there had been a sort of lack of dialogue, of collaboration at either of these points, and now we have sort of the architects, we have the landscape architect, the engineer, and even the builders, this would not have happened. And we think moving forward to think about how can we also build a more sustainable way for the future. We need not just the architects to talk with the landscape architects or the traffic planners, but also with the biologists, also with the people who know about sociology or how people are changing and needs are changing. how people who know something about materials and reuse, and this list goes on, and what we can also learn from some of those examples from the 1960s, where those collaborations were perhaps more tight-knit and more active and than they tend to be today in the building sector, can really show something about how to create a good process around a building or another project in the building sector, and that takes a long time, and that effort is required about how to create dialogue, for these groups to talk to each other. And that's why we want to do it almost like we call it, we don't really know what to call it really, but a form of historical ethnography, which is of course impossible to do because we cannot go in and observe as things are happening. We can't do action research, but we can try to reconstruct what happened and how those collaborations came about. And that's what we set out to do in this research project.
Perhaps I can add something about the contemporary practice. So today we see that there is a renewed call for and interest in working interdisciplinary. So we see many firms, for instance, having biologists and engineers and anthropologists and architects in the same studio. And we also see more and more, large engineering companies working, buying architectural companies and so on. So the teams tend to be bigger and bigger, and there's often in competitions also, in design competitions, a call for interdisciplinary teams. But there's also a lot that hinders a real collaboration. For instance, the public tenders and public contracts and so on, and also private contracts are often very separating a building task into many different sections, meaning that sometimes it's, you have entirely new teams coming in after a short time. So there's a lot of disruption, and because we have become so specialized today, it can also sometimes be simply difficult to speak with each other. When you are this team, people have different, words have different meanings in architecture or in anthropology or in engineering. So sometimes things can get lost in translation. And the same goes with questions about diversity. There is a growing interest in and call for a more diverse building sector in terms of gender and bodily ability and cultural background and so on. But we are still at the beginning of it. So there's a huge interest in transforming practice, but there's also still a big need to find ways in which to do so.
So now the last question from us. So how does this connect to sustainability, considering the research process and expected outcomes?
So to us, sustainability requires multiple perspectives around the table. One perspective, one person, one hero cannot create a sustainable way of addressing the built environment alone. So even in our research process, we have gathered this interdisciplinary team, and we will be reaching out to practice partners and work in dialogue with the public and with students and with colleagues, of course, our international peers in research. So in that way, we are sort of trying to walk the talk. If we're interested in collaboration, we will also work in a interdisciplinary collaboration ourselves. And we see this as tying to sustainability in different ways. First, by hopefully being able to provide new knowledge, new ways of looking at collaboration by providing this new historical understanding so that we can learn about collaboration and hopefully build more relevant and strong collaborations for the future to address the questions that we're working with today, based on this new historical understanding that we are providing. And secondly, we are providing a new historical understanding of a legacy that is almost everywhere in Denmark. That is the legacy from the big building boom of the 60s and 70s. And we need to find more sustainable ways of addressing this legacy than, trying to demolish and build a new that's resource intensive, and it's also not very socially sustainable. So in order to be able to address this built heritage and care for it in ways that where we can make the future city with this heritage rather than trying to get rid of it, as we form the future, will be a much more sustainable way. And to do so, we need a more substantial understanding of what we have and what qualities are there already.
I think I could just hear and talk more about this project for hours. It was very interesting to hear and learn more about this project and process of it. And I think it was also interesting to see what you aim to bring into discussions and how you navigate the research process and environment as well. So, yes, that was amazing. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you.
So today we talked about learning from collaboration, research project co-led by Svava, Riesto and Henriette Steiner from University of Copenhagen. And we went back to the building boom in Denmark that had started during 1960s. We got this amazing opportunity to discuss what we can learn from the past for today and future practices. We talked about the importance of collaboration, how we value our built environment, its legacy as a society today, and where all these stand when we talk about sustainability as well. It was such an interesting topic, and we are very happy to have brought this into discussion as our first episode. But unfortunately, that was all from today. And what I can say for now is just that stay tuned for our next episode in Green Talks.